Hey, good morning. Welcome back to another episode of Grid Gone Wild. I'm Nathan with EG4 Electronics. I'm out here with Mr. Aaron Johnson, part of our technical support team, and today we're going to be talking about the do's and don'ts of solar installations. AJ, good morning, man. How are you?
Pretty good, dude. How are you doing?
Not too bad. Hey, I know that me and you over kind of our careers with EG4 and then careers, prior in my world, because I've been doing this about 11 years now, we've seen a lot of the do's and don'ts of solar. And today that's what I want to talk about is kind of the things that we see in the field and see the mistakes that customers are making out in the field, and I want to address those to give our customers the best opportunities to install our system correctly and give our end users the best possible outcome for their solar installations.
100%.
So just getting started, right? So kind of the first thing in the do's category is we want to make sure that guys are reading the installation manual. This is going to give you the best opportunity for success with our systems. And ensuring that you understand the installation process. In your experience, AJ, kind of what do you see guys not doing in that world as far as reading the installation manual or maybe even understanding the technical aspects of the install?
I don't think I've ever seen anybody read a manual before.
It's absolutely correct, man. As an electrician, right, so in my experience, right, 11 years in the industry, that is our most common issue, right, is guys don't read the installation manual. They're really depending on the tech support guys, which ultimately causes a lot of backlog in our world, right? So we end up on the phone with guys for, 30, 45 minutes, maybe even an hour, just diagnosing very simple issues that guys could have resolved had they read the installation manual.
For sure, you can definitely tell who did their homework and who didn't.
Sure.
You can be through the commissioning in 15 minutes if you want to, if it was done right,
Right.
Or you could be on the phone for an hour and a half, going
Definitely.
down everything and redoing it. So.
Yeah. So another big thing that I see is the safety requirements in that same kind of world, right? So when you're working with electrical equipment, you should have your proper PPE, right? You should have your electrical gloves on, your safety glasses. You should have an electrical exclusion zone for guys that are not electricians, because we are working with high voltage, right? Your DC voltage can definitely cause harm or even fatality, depending on what kind of voltage you're working with. And that's a big issue, right? I go out to job sites and guys aren't wearing their proper PPE. They don't have exclusion zones set up, and you have guys walking through electrical areas that they probably shouldn't be in because they're not familiar with the process and the hazards that are associated with it.
For sure. It also depends on where you're at, too, man. A lot of these off-grid guys don't worry about anything like that, and they should. So
talking about DIY guys, right? And God knows that we came from that DIY space. That's kind of where we started. EG4 now, over the last about a year and a half, has transitioned more into the grid-tied market, which is kind of your basic installations for your residential homeowners, not your DIY customers.
Yeah.
But something I've noticed with DIY customers is they tend to read the install manual because they don't have any other support method.
100%.
So those guys, for me, is kind of the nicest version of installers because when they call, they know what they're doing, right? They've read the installation manual, they've researched the products, they understand electrical theory, they understand how to install it, and then you get your installation companies that are basically just sending guys out that may have little to no experience working with a hybrid system versus a traditional grid-tied system where there is no battery backup, no energy storage systems. So DIY guys, man, I love you. Keep doing what you're doing.
Sure.
You guys are doing amazing. Another thing that we run across a lot with just basic wiring is proper grounding. A continuous grounding path is required in most jurisdictions.
Yeah.
And I see that a lot. I mean, I see guys all the time not grounding their conduit boxes, right? You've got DC voltage going through there. You need to ground that equipment. On top of the fact that you need to meet your AHJ requirements as well as staying up to date with NEC codes.
Yeah.
And guys, unfortunately, just tend to kind of, I don't want to say miss it, but they definitely don't do it all the time.
For sure, and it's kind of one of them things where if you hadn't done it the whole time, you're not going to do it.
That's right? It's kind of monkey see, monkey do, especially if you get a guy that's not doing it and he's training a new technician. If he's not teaching that guy, he's not going to know that that's kind of the process, which is where our team comes in, right? So we're moving towards more of a pre-installation training where we're going to go out and do trainings either at our distribution channel partners or at our installation company's offices. So that way we can meet with these guys prior to install to really give them a good foundation for installing correctly.
Yeah, and I think that's the approach to take anyhow. You nip it in the bud. You start from the beginning. Everybody's on the same page. And you train your leads. They go train their team. It just all works out better that way.
Right. I'm a big fan of train the trainers. There is some installation companies out here, especially your larger install companies, that do have a training team. So if we can get to a point where we can train their trainers and get them 100% on board and understand kind of the process, the maintenance issues, updating firmware, stuff like that, and they're training their team correctly, that ultimately should mitigate most of our phone calls outside of, electrical failures. Of course, no company is perfect. We're going to have problems. Systems are going to fail. It's unfortunate, but that's just kind of the world that we live in. Electronics are never going to be 100% reliable.
I think a good thing too is if they know what they're doing and connect it correctly, then we can go through and say, okay, this is an effective unit because you've already gone through this.
Right.
We know that it's connected correctly.
Exactly. Just kind of moving on, we've got a lot to cover, so we're going to try to get through everything and get you guys the most amount of information we can. Another big issue we see is utilizing the correct wire sizing. You can pretty much go on Google these days and just type in what your amperage rating is or what your DC voltage is, and it'll identify what the correct wiring size is. Unfortunately, you'll get guys that'll go out in the field and maybe they don't have the correct wire size and they'll put the next best thing, right? So ultimately what that can do is that can cause issues with the install, right? You could potentially melt a wire. You could have a breaker trip. You could have an internal fuse or relay pop inside of maybe our grid boss or something like that. I know that we offer, or we've seen systems that have, guys have installed it either incorrectly or utilized the wrong, wire ampacity.
For sure.
And caused issues with our systems. Again, this just kind of reverts back to that installation manual. The install manual is going to tell you what the appropriate wire size is for the amperage rating in the system that you're installing.
For sure. Just keep it simple,
I mean, I'm not going to say it, but everybody knows what KISS stands for, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Continuing on, and a lot of this is going to be installation manual based, right? So all of our install manuals were really written geared towards the DIY market because DIY guys want to know all that information. And like we talked about, installers traditionally do not read installation manuals.
Nope.
On top of the fact our install manuals are, 100 pages long.
100%.
So it's going to take a day or two to get through it, especially if you're like me. I'm not a big reader. It's not my cup of tea. I'd rather be out in the field, plugging in wires and playing with Sparky.
Those guys are trying to go home, right?
That's right. Right. The faster they can get in and off a site is the faster they get paid. It's not necessarily conducive to good install practices, but I understand from a financial obligation that that's kind of what their expectations are in the field. Enabling that battery communication, again, we're going back to the installation manual. We see this all the time. Guys not sharing battery banks between inverters or having imbalanced legs, right? So let's say you had 2 inverters and 4 batteries, and they may put 3 batteries on one inverter and 1 battery on the other, and now you've got an imbalanced load.
Yeah.
And that ultimately is going to cause issues because your batteries are never going to charge at the same rate. So you'll get that imbalancing, which could ultimately cause issues with either, a grid outage situation where that load overcurrent could be an issue because one battery is not going to produce or discharge at the same rate as the 3 battery system.
For sure. And if your if your inverters are communicating, they're going to split the load. And if they don't have the capacity to do that because one's got more batteries than the other,
That's
you
right.
run into those issues as well.
So for future reference, when you're doing those kind of installs with our batteries, you're either going to want to have equal amounts of battery per inverter if you're running segregated, or if you're doing a solid battery bank, you're going to want to make sure that both of those inverters are connected to the battery bank so you get equal distribution of those loads coming out of the batteries to support those loads on the back end. So that way you don't have those imbalanced legs on your 12240 systems.
Yep, split it right down the middle in every way possible.
That's right. Something else that we see a lot, a ton, is checking polarity. Before you turn on a system, put a voltmeter on it. Check your grid input, check your load output, check your string sizes, right? That's something that we see a lot. I know I've seen it a ton in my career, is you'll get guys that just go by plans, right? Plans are not always accurate. People make mistakes on the design phase or in the system review phase. Put a voltmeter on it, make sure that you're not overloading that DC bus current, and make sure you've got good voltage coming in as well as good voltage going out on that load port or your backed up load panel. So that's a big one. Get a voltmeter, understand how to use it. If you don't know, every voltmeter in the world comes with a manual. Again, going back to guys not reading install manuals. Guys don't read manuals for anything, right? We're guys. That's kind of what we do. No guy reads directions. You go buy some furniture at IKEA or something like that, you're just going to go through it. You're going to end up with extra parts. It's going to be a little wobbly. Your wife's going to be mad on the back end.
Yep.
Very similar situation, except now the wife is the homeowner, and now you're in trouble again.
Always circles back.
Following NEC Code. NEC Code updates virtually every year. AHJs are not always up to date on their most NEC codes. Sometimes they'll be a year or two behind. I've seen as many as 5 or 6 years behind for certain AHJs.
Really?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. When I was installing out in California a number of years ago, they were on, I want to say like NEC 2012, and it was 2017.
Okay.
In 5 years variation, an NEC code is a lifetime, right? Things change, technology updates. We see that, and then you have your UL listings that update and change as well. So make sure you guys are reading up on your NEC codes, understanding what the process and procedure is to make sure that we're following that NEC code so we're not causing damage to property or potentially any kind of risk hazards to installers and or the homeowners.
Yeah. And you want to pass the inspection.
Well, inspection's important, right? If we don't get the inspection passed, guess what? The homeowner's not going to get solar or it's not going to be a functional system.
Right.
So keeping up with that is very, very, very lucrative. And this is just going back to kind of that voltage test, right? We have our string sizer on our website. Go in there, be proactive, right? When you get your plan sets back from your design system and you've got that PE stamp, go back and review it. If you don't know how to do that, please reach out to somebody on our team. We're happy to go through it with you, teach you how to use that string sizer accordingly. So that way we're making sure that you are giving your homeowners the best possible outcome for their system to be functional.
For sure.
In that string sizer, there is an opportunity in there to select the panel type that you're utilizing. You go in and put in your highest rated temperature, your lowest rated temperature to make sure that during a low temperature situation, your voltage rise doesn't increase above that 600 volts DC.
Yeah.
So utilize that string sizer. Again, if you don't know where that is or you don't know how to use it, don't understand it, please reach out to us. Our tech support team is very well versed in that. So please reach out. We're happy to help. Just going down the line here, single line diagrams, this just kind of follows that same path, right? So when you're looking at that as a whole and you go through that string sizer, make sure that you're reviewing that single line diagram so when you get out to that job site, you're aware of what you should be doing versus what you don't need. Sometimes we'll get equipment or we'll get line diagrams that maybe they're not correct based on how our system is designed.
Yeah.
They're going to be functional from that standpoint because they're going to work from a utility standpoint, but when the grid goes down, that may not be a functional system anymore.
Right.
So that's always a good one.
I would say that's the biggest thing right there, because if you can get it right on paper, the installer's going to install it
Per plans.
Exactly.
Right.
And so
the other option that we have as well, if you do have a single line diagram and you're a little bit confused or maybe you're not trusting the design team, maybe you've had issues in the past with that, reach out to us. AJ, myself, we have a couple other technicians here at the office that are very well versed in single line diagram and reviewing those plan sets to make sure that they are going to meet NEC codes as well as AHJ requirements for your location. We're happy to review those. If you reach out, we'll just ask you to send those plan sets over. We'll do the review. We'll set up a meeting. We'll go back and review it with you if there is any issues. If not, we're basically just going to reply to you and go, hey, man, good to go. Give us a call if you need anything.
Yeah, and I think the more information we get out there, people are starting to understand how our product works,
Yeah.
how to set it up, and all that stuff. So it's getting better, but I would say that's the biggest thing, because whatever that single line diagram says is what's going to be on the wall. So.
Exactly. That's what those guys are going to go out and install. Labeling all your connections, this is a big one. And this is pretty much just getting into, it's a good way to word that, your inspection, right?
Yeah.
If all of your equipment is not properly labeled with your AC and DC voltage, your form of disconnect, whether that's an AC or DC disconnect, an isolated DC disconnect on the wall, whatever it is, it needs to be properly labeled in order for the inspector to understand kind of your electrical path to make sure that it's going to be safe for the homeowner, also that it's going to function as designed on the back end for the utility company, so we're not going to end up hurting somebody in the long run. Whether that's a lineman, a technician that's going out on site, or somebody from our team.
Yeah.
So that is the basics of the do's of solar installation. I do want to get into the don'ts, and this is going to be a much longer process because there's a lot of don'ts. And I want to talk a little bit, get in more depth about things that we've seen that guys have done that we want to make sure they're not going to do in the future.
Yeah.
Biggest one, and AJ, I'm going to kind of resort to you on this, is don't mix battery types.
Yeah.
What's kind of your thoughts on that?
So obviously the way we set our stuff up is to BMS communicate in closed loop. It keeps the lithium safe. It makes it last longer. It's how we prefer to do things. But you start to get into, a lead acid battery with the lithium battery or the AGM batteries, you're going to have issues. You're going to have balancing issues. It's not going to charge the same. It's not going to work the same. It's just definitely don't do that.
So what would be a hazard, let's say, if somebody had an existing, ESS system, but it was on lead acid, and then they chose to go and say, hey, I want to add a couple of all-weather batteries. So what would be the fear or the problematic issues with going and mixing a lead acid with a lithium battery system?
Just how we set our stuff up, obviously, and then it just wouldn't work how it's supposed to work.
Would that be an issue, like, let's say from, like on lead acid, traditionally we measure in voltage, right, with lead acid. And then when we go over to lithium, traditionally we measure that in state of charge.
Yeah, for sure.
So how would that affect that state of charge or the balancing issue like you addressed?
You'd be trying to do two different things at the same time.
So it's just not, it's going to get confused, right? It's not going to understand whether it should prioritize voltage over state of charge or state of charge over voltage.
Right.
So then you may end up with one battery that doesn't take a charge at the rate that the other one takes a charge. So then you have that imbalance load, right?
Yes, sir.
Don't skip the pre-charge. All of our batteries do come pre-charged. Most of what I've seen in the field traditionally is right about 50 or 60% out of the box. Of course, if that battery was to sit for any length of time not hooked up, of course that battery state of charge could decrease to some level because it's just going to continue to discharge at a slow rate.
Yeah.
As far as pre-charging goes, really the only way to do that would be to hook up, like a 48 volt battery charger. You could also utilize a charge inverter, which we also offer.
Yeah.
To get those batteries up to, that 100% state of charge. If that battery out of the box is at 50 or 60%, you're probably going to be okay because that solar is going to kick in. It's going to charge the battery. But if that battery ever was, at a state of charge, 20% or lower, I would recommend doing that pre-charge to make sure we don't have any, preconditions that could, I don't want to say cause that battery to be defective, but could cause it not to perform at its peak right out of the box.
Yeah.
This goes back to what we were talking about earlier, man. Don't oversize the PV array. This is a big one. I've had multiple customers at some point that have built DC strings to, let's say, 550 volts DC, and our bus bar internally is rated to 600 volts. 550 is fine until you get that cold weather drop,
Yeah.
right?
Every time winter hits, this happens.
That's right. So you get guys that'll build those systems to, like I said, 550 volts. They have, one solid cold. You guys had Snowmageddon out here in Texas a number of years ago. That would have had a dramatic increase in your DC voltage.
Yeah.
And we've seen that over the last, couple months. We're getting into summertime now, so it's not as big of an issue. But during the winter, it definitely is. We see guys where we get phone calls a lot that says, hey, I'm getting this, DC bus over current. And we go back and we review that system, and it's like, yeah, well, that's why, right? So you built it to 550, and then in the cold temperature, you might be at 605, 610.
Yeah.
And that DC bus is going to throw that fault 99.9% of the time. So definitely something to keep an eye on. Again, utilize that string sizer. It's really, really beneficial. Again, if you don't know what you're doing or you have questions about it, please reach out. We're happy to go through and address that with you. This just kind of caveats to that. Don't expose to extreme temperatures. Any manufacturer in the world of solar inverters, batteries, it will say right in the install manual, and I would bet on it. I know our equipment does. Do not mount that in the direct sunlight.
Yeah.
I live in Arizona. If you were to put that on a south-facing wall in Arizona in the summertime, 118 degrees, you're going to start having electrical problems, right? It's either going to cook the inverter or you're going to start seeing some really weird stuff going on with that system. It may not function as designed. So make sure installing that, under an eave, preferably, on a north-facing wall. You're going to get the least amount of sun exposure in that world, being in the northern hemisphere. So make sure that we're doing that. Again, that string sizer is going to be kind of your go-to because you can go through and put that high-low temperature, and that's going to give you the best possible outcome to keep that DC voltage down. The other thing that I've seen lately with our string sizer is you can go through and let's say you had MPPT1, right, which is paralleled internally with, I think, almost all of our inverters.
Yeah.
And you may run the string sizer at 14 panels, and it's going to say, yeah, that's okay. Don't do it. Yeah. Break that 14 panels down into 2 strings of 7, and that's going to keep your DC voltage way below your threshold without reducing your wattage input to charge and discharge those batteries.
Yeah.
That's something I've seen a lot. So if you have an opportunity for that internal paralleling, divide those strings up. It's going to give you the best possible outcome moving forward with those. Don't stack your batteries too tightly. This kind of goes into your heat dissipation. You don't want to put your equipment so close together that if one inverter is blowing out hot air, you don't want the other inverter pulling in that hot air.
Yeah.
Right? You want to have some separation to make sure that we're allowing proper ventilation for those systems as to not overheat them. Again, that just kind of goes back into that south-facing wall. Something you don't want to do.
Yeah, and a lot of people try to stack those server racks directly on top of each other.
Okay, I've never seen that.
Yeah. But that's why we have the racks. That's why it's all
Yeah, and
configured in there that way.
I know we've got some testing done that says that we can put our batteries a little bit closer than what even I'm comfortable with.
Yeah.
I think we're down to like 6 inches. I think is our separate 4 to 6 inches. I think is what we've got testing to now.
For the all-weather?
Yeah, for the all-weather. Yeah. And with that, that's fine that we have that testing. Something I don't recommend is keep that 12-inch separation, 11, 12 inches. A couple benefits there, right? You're going to get good heat dissipation, so the batteries aren't going to be so close that they're really just feeding off of each other in that heat world. The other thing is a lot on our outdoor batteries specifically is all of the communication, the LCD screen, the breaker, your dip switch settings for your master and parallel batteries. In order to get in there and really be able to see what's going on with that LCD screen and have good functionality to reach in it and, turn a breaker on, check your wiring and your parallel communications, I recommend that 12 inches because it allows you enough room to get in there and work. If they're at that 4 or 6 inches, it may be a little tight. I'm not even a big guy, and I think it's a little difficult under 12 inches.
For sure. And it's definitely hard to get the sides off that thing.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're close, there's no way you're going to get those off and be able to work on it from, let's say, from a service standpoint, right? You go out, you do the install, and then there's an issue with the system. You've got to go out and troubleshoot or do some diagnostics. If it is that close, you're going to see that, I'm going to call it a negative connotation, where the technician may get mad at the installer and go, hey man, why did you put these so close? I can't even get in here to do my work.
Right.
So I don't recommend it. Do we have testing that says you can? Sure. Don't ignore error codes. This is a big one. All of our inverters will throw an error code. There's LED lights on all of our Flex series that will show, faults and errors. If you do see that, right, go in, identify what that issue is or what that fault is. If it's something that you're not sure about, again, call our tech support team. This is literally what these guys do all day. You for the most part sit behind a desk all day these days.
Yeah.
And just talk to guys about issues that they're seeing, improper wiring, ampacity is another big one. So looking at those faults, identifying what the issues are, talking to our tech support teams. As long as that system's online, we're able to go in, we can make review changes. We can identify issues. Now, we need to have a technician on site, and this is something that we've seen a lot, is we'll get customers that call and say, hey, this is going on with my system, but I'm not home. Or, the installation company's like, I don't have a technician available. That doesn't work for us.
Right.
Especially because some of the changes that we can make could potentially take that system offline for any one length of time, right? From 2 to 5 minutes, could be even longer depending on the system or your Wi-Fi connectivity. So having a technician out on site is crucial to us being successful in that world of being able to troubleshoot and remotely, fix the system. Maybe there is an issue with a cable, and the only way we can identify that issue is to have a technician on site, unplugging and plugging things in, running volt tests, stuff like that. So making sure that a technician is on site is going to be the best possible outcome to resolve any kind of issues like that with faults and or errors. Don't DIY beyond your skill level. I'm going to say this is not, I'm going to take the DIY out of it, right? Don't install beyond your abilities or your capabilities or knowledge base. And I know we've seen that. A lot of install companies today, especially companies I've worked for in the past, will have one master electrician for the whole company, and then their technicians will work underneath that master license. So most of these guys that are installing they're not electricians, they're not master electricians, they're basically just, guys that have had very rudimentary electrical training. Yeah. If you're not comfortable doing something or you don't understand this process, we have our university online. And this is kind of everybody that's installing our products from a professional standpoint should be utilizing our university so they can go through and learn the do's and don'ts, right? How to connect the system, how to do commissioning, basic settings and parameters to get certain expectations met. And unfortunately, guys don't do that. So if you're not comfortable with it, if you don't understand the process or don't understand, how that electricity is going to pass through or back up a load in the event of an outage, either get with your master electrician, talk to them, identify what needs to be done. If there's any kind of uncertainty, our tech support line, that's literally what they're there for, is to help troubleshoot these issues or guide you in the correct way to do the installations. This is another big one, man. Did you write this, AJ?
What?
All these do's and don'ts?
A few of them. Yeah.
So you nailed it here, man. Don't ignore manufacturer updates. I just had a customer yesterday reached out, was having an issue with the system. I jumped in there and took a look at it, and they were, I think, 6 updates behind.
Wow.
Yeah, it was substantial, right? And
for sure.
So we don't, at this time, we're not doing any kind of automatic updates, or we're not really sending out a notification that says, hey, your system needs an update. You're on, XYZ, and you need to be on this system. But just going in, and you can go right on our website to our systems, and it'll show all those recent firmware updates and what those updates are going to accomplish. I know we had an issue recently. I live in Arizona. So we do not adhere to daylight savings time.
Yeah.
And we had a firmware update recently that resolved that issue, because what it was doing is it was going back and putting it into daylight savings time. So then the number, like your times didn't match what time it was actually functioning. So you had that hour variation. So you get a phone call and guys are like, hey, like my system showed it went offline at 5 p.m., but it actually went off at 4 p.m. So then it gives inaccurate data. So then it's hard for us to troubleshoot it accordingly. That system that I'm talking about, that's all it was. It was an update. We got the update done. It reverted back to its traditional time. The daylight savings time was then disabled, and the system's operating as designed.
Yep.
So doing those updates is crucial, especially when we identify an issue with a system. We go through, our firmware team goes through, creates a new firmware. They launch that on our website. So then that is available via our monitoring portal, either on the web and or on your phone. So doing those updates is crucial. Just making sure that the system's going to operate optimally. Kind of going back into ventilation, I know we talked about it a little bit. Doing that ventilation or keeping that ventilation is really crucial to maintaining equipment efficiency, right? If it gets too hot, you're going to lose efficiency.
Yeah.
Whether that's on the DC side or the AC side or just overall equipment. We want to make sure that we're getting proper ventilation of those, so we don't see any of those issues, and that will also help mitigate, future issues or future phone calls from the tech team saying, hey, why is this system doing, whatever it is. Systems going into fault for overheating or overcurrent definitely could be caused by temperature variations. So making sure that we're doing that is always going to be good. Last one on the list here, don't neglect regular maintenance. Traditionally, what I like to tell guys is when you go through and you're doing an install, and you're torquing all your wiring and stuff like that, don't be afraid to go back out there and recheck that, right? Because as you get thermal expansion and contraction, you are going to lose that torque value at some point. So going back out there and ensuring that those torque values are met is really crucial, right? So if you have, let's say, I don't know, a grid input, right? You've got 2 legs of 120, and one of those legs, for whatever reason, during thermal expansion and contraction, it gets loose. You may lose a leg, or what we call a leg, right? You're going to lose 120. You're going to lose 120 volts coming in, and that's going to fault the inverter. And ultimately, there's nothing wrong with the system. It's just the fact that it's not getting good connectivity to maintain that 120 volts. So maintaining that is really, really crucial for maintaining system operational and functionality.
Yeah. You taught me something on that one.
Yeah, so making sure we go back and do that. Kind of what I want to do now is just kind of an open dialogue about the best and worst things that you've seen here at EG4 that customers have done that ultimately either cause equipment failure, equipment damage, or have ultimately produced a high-end cost for the installer going back and servicing the systems. Kind of what's your thoughts, or what have you seen that's really been an issue?
So one of the funnest ones that I've ever been on, a lady met me there. I was there without the installer, just there with the homeowner, getting everything going. She invited me in. We went through all the settings and all this, and she said she was a flight attendant. So I was like, I love those Biscoff cookies that they serve on the plane or whatever. And she was like, here, and gave me a whole sleeve of Biscoff cookies. So.
Wait, hold on. Did they make it back to EG4 to your house?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? You didn't eat them all there?
No.
You sure?
It was a short trip, yeah.
It was a short trip?
Yeah.
I can tell you one of the best systems I've been a part of was actually recently, and it was out in Pennsylvania. And we show up, and this particular homeowner had actually reached out to EG4. He's a big tech guy, loves technology, loves the automation system. He's got a couple of smart panels in his home.
Yeah.
He's got a generator. Basically, he's trying to build the biggest robust system he can that is just completely smart and automated. So I go out on site, and this guy, it was 2 grid bosses, 1 flex boss, 4 batteries, a generator. I mean, I want to say it was like 75 panels. And the system just was flawless. The installer was very well versed. He actually read the install manual, which was great. Huge shout out to that guy. I know you're watching. He knows who he is. But that was one of the best, man. It was down in a basement. We got all the equipment mounted day 1. Day 2, we went through wiring and commissioning. We got the system operational. We got that generator on a 2-wire start. It functioned as designed. Homeowner was over the moon happy. And ultimately, this guy is a huge proponent of EG4, just technology overall. But he's screaming it from the rooftops in Pennsylvania. So I hope that that kind of drives some more business for us long term. And the company that's out there installing is traditionally a roofing company. They weren't even in the installation world.
Seeing that more and more nowadays.
Yeah, so yeah, again, and so this company started out as going in to just do the roofing, and this homeowner saw that, hey, like, you guys also do solar. And they're like, yeah, and he said, I want EG4. I don't want this company. I don't want this company. This is what I want. Right? He's done his research, so they reached out to us, myself, James Showalter, the homeowner, and the installation company. All jumped into a meeting. We did a plan. Yeah, it was a great meeting. We really went through what the homeowner's expectation was. We helped them out with design, kind of what his expectations were for battery storage.
Yeah.
And he got the generator, which ultimately is great as a last resort backup. But he's
Likely will never touch it.
Right. He's not going to touch it. Right. The guy's got 20 some kilowatts of solar on the roof. He's got 80 some kilowatt hours of storage with the 4 batteries. If that generator turns on ever, I'd be very, very surprised. Maybe in Pennsylvania they get some big northeastern storm that just completely shuts the sun down for 3 or 4 days. He might be in trouble then. But I don't see it. I truly don't. That's probably one of my favorite installs and favorite install stories because it was just such a flawless install.
Yeah.
Install team was on point. They understood electrical theory. Even getting into, with rapid shutdown, that's another big one that I see, and we'll go into that, is how to correctly wire like an e-stop, an outside e-stop, because this equipment was in the basement. So from a firefighter's perspective, they need that disconnect outside. And this guy was just Johnny on the spot, right?
Yeah.
He understood what he needed to do. He understood the wiring theory. Again, he read the install manual, which was huge. The worst, or one of the worst installs I've ever seen is cross-polarizing batteries, which in my head, I can't imagine how that's even possible.
Yeah. It does happen a lot, though.
But I don't know if you guys can see this in the clip. We've got some batteries back behind us, and the positive side of our batteries is annotated color code, right, with orange. And I'm thinking maybe we need to change that to red. I don't know.
Also, though, the positive is on this side of the battery, but you connect it to the left side of the inverter.
Right.
So that gets confusing too sometimes.
It definitely could, but I think maybe if we went to red connectors over orange connectors for the positive side, that might help mitigate some of that. The other thing that I've heard guys kind of I don't want to say complain about, but engineering requests, let's call it, which we also have. If you guys out there in TV land ever have ideas that you guys would like to see EG4 do as a manufacturer, reach out to our tech team, reach out to somebody from our team here at tech support, and tell us what you guys want. We're happy to push that up to our engineering team. If it is something viable that is going to have a positive impact on EG4 and on the installation, we're happy to make those changes for you. So keep that in mind out there. But the big one I see too is the strands of our battery cables are very, very fine.
Yeah.
And when you're going to put those inside the lugs, a lot of guys kind of complain that not all those little baby wires want to sit just right inside of that lug. Some options that we've come across, or I've seen installers do, I've seen guys wrap them in electrical tape and then slide them into the port and then pull that electrical tape back out.
Yeah.
That's one method. I've heard of guys using zip ties, zip tying those cables closed, sliding them in, and then just snipping that zip tie off. Totally fine. I've seen guys use no-ox. If you know what that is.
I don't.
It's basically just an electrical grease that you put on your wires and slide it in there. Yeah. So that's
what I always.
It's kind of a sticky material, so it'll hold those strands together a little bit better.
It's like the oxidation stuff, right?
Right. The other thing, what I like to do is I'll just go ahead and twist the ends a little bit, and then I'll roll the cable around. So as I'm putting it in, I'm twisting it in the same direction as the wire, and that tends to hold those wires in place pretty efficiently.
Yeah, some people have gotten pretty good at it that I've seen. But that's the biggest complaint is the battery.
Yeah, and I've had this conversation with our research and development team as well as our product development team. And basically, if we were to go to a thicker stranded wire, what we would end up having is a loss of ampacity. And that's why we went to that thinner strand, is to maintain that 200 amps of ampacity for the batteries. So we're not going to change it. Don't send me an engineering request for that. I've already fought that battle and lost. So the other one, grounding, I'm going to go back to this, not grounding the conduit boxes. I see that all the time. There is a ground lug in there, I promise you. If I'm not mistaken, it's in the back left corner.
Back left corner.
Yeah, right by the ground side of the battery. So if you're ever confused on what battery side is what, look for the ground. The ground is going to be on the grounding side. Your communication cable is always going to be on the positive side.
Yeah.
What else we got here? We went through MPPTs with DC voltage. We haven't really hit on generators at all.
As far as what?
What have you seen generator-wise as far as guys installing them, or maybe even buying? I'm going to call it less than efficient generators, right? Maybe you buy a lower-end generator because you don't have the finances to afford, a $20,000,
Which
generator.
is where the charge inverter starts to make sense for those.
Let's talk about it. What do you think with the charge inverter?
I think if you have a generator that's not less than 3% THD, then you need to use the charge inverter.
And THD for the people at home.
Total harmonic distortion.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. And so basically, for those that don't understand, so what you'll get is you'll get a frequency imbalance coming out of that generator. And what that charge inverter does is it cleans up that pathway, right? It cleans up that signal to allow that generator to produce at its rate and allow the inverter and battery system to input that power without having any kind of distortion.
Yeah.
And then that generator or that charge inverter, there's a couple options, right? You can wire that how? 120, 240?
Yeah, so 50 amps at 120 and then 100 amps at 240.
Okay. And then that's just plug in the wall?
Yeah. Or a generator.
Could. Could go right to the Jenny, sure.
Yeah.
Let's see here. And I know this is something that, and this is a personal pet peeve with me. Going to the Flex Series, I love it. The Flex Series it's very sleek. It's very well designed. What I'm not a huge fan of is not having the LCD screen. Because then what ultimately happens is you may have, let's call it a DIY customer that buys a Flex Series. And now they can't go in and make those settings changes. Maybe they don't have Wi-Fi. They're in a rural community. Their cell signal is weak.
Yeah.
Whatever that issue is, now they don't have the opportunity to make settings changes on the fly, let's say. But we did fix that issue, right?
Yeah.
So now we have an optional LCD screen that can be purchased separately from the unit. I don't know cost on that top of my head. I think it's a couple $100 maybe or something like that.
No clue.
But you get that, and then you regain that functionality.
Yeah.
Of being able to make those settings changes on the fly at the residence. Let's say that maybe you don't want EG4 monitoring to have access to your system, and that's totally fine. I know we have customers like that, especially in the DIY world, where they don't want us to be into their system. They don't want to worry about us going in there and making settings changes, stuff like that.
Yeah. I hear about it all the time with the servers and stuff like that.
Server rack for sure. A lot of those guys tend to be more DIY and off grid over our indoor outdoor batteries.
For sure. One thing I was going to mention though about the screen is I would recommend that for every installer to have that and take it with them from job to job.
Sure, just so they can make those settings changes. Maybe they have bad cell signal. It's also a little. I find it easier to utilize that LCD screen. It's a little bit more intuitive than utilizing the app for settings changes. The app is great for basic rudimentary settings, but when you really want to dial in voltage, state of charge, enable or disable battery backup mode, seamless EPS switching, I think it's easier either on the web-based portal or to do it via the LCD screen.
For sure.
I know we also have, so we have the optional LCD screen for the Flex Series that can be installed directly into the unit and left permanently on site. And I don't think it's out yet, but there's also a remote or a take with you when you go LCD screen, and I don't think that's quite available yet on the market.
Yeah.
But when we get to that point and we release that product, I do recommend that every install company takes one of those and has them on the truck. So that way they can go into the Flex Series, plug that guy in, make their settings changes, unplug it, take it with them when they go. I think that's a great feature from an installer's perspective. Maybe not the best option for a DIY customer.
I don't know.
No, I mean the Grid Boss is probably our newest, latest, and greatest. It does reduce switchgear on the wall, right? Because you've got that you've got your utility input, right? If you wanted to make that your first form of disconnect, you could. You could throw that 200 amp breaker, whatever your service rating is, 100, 150, 200. You can throw that breaker in and then utilize that as your utility disconnect at the site without having to worry about adding all this additional AC disconnects. Getting into multimeters, whether it's an RGM or revenue grade meter for bidirectional for cell back rates, consumption versus production, stuff like that. Oh, you mentioned communication cables. Big one, right?
Yeah.
Understanding how to do closed loop communication as well as paralleling the batteries. What I see, the batteries mostly, is that they're not getting the 485 plugs, they're not getting them seated all the way. They think they are, and then they're not. And a lot of times I'm on the phone with these guys like, hey, just go back and check those plugs real quick. And 9 times out of 10, one of those plugs is not seated correctly or all the way in. And as soon as they get that thing plugged in, that system pop backs up. I'm able to see it, and then we're able to make those settings changes.
For sure, the batteries are pretty simple as far as troubleshooting goes. It's either this or nothing.
Not a lot of mechanical stuff going on there, right? Making sure that your battery connections are made and they're appropriate. Making sure those comms cables are wired correctly. When you're doing your battery comms, kind of what's your process for the paralleling, right? So you've got your RS-45 that's going up into the inverter on your master.
Yep.
Now, when you're doing your paralleling, do you tend to bounce left to right, or do you do left to left? On your paralleling, so you've got your three ports. You got your RS-45 on top, and then your 2 battery comms.
Yeah.
If you plug into, let's say, your slave battery, on the far right, let's call it. And do you plug into the far right port, or do you plug into the left port? And then for your second and third or fourth batteries, do you offset? Do you stagger them left to right, right to left, left to right?
No,
or for you it doesn't really matter.
No. So as long as your RS-45 can's going to the inverter, as long as it's going to the inverter, then the bottom 2 can go anywhere. So it's backcom to backcom, and RS-45 to can.
Gotcha.
To the inverter.
So I like to be symmetrical, and that's just something with me. I don't know, like OCD or something maybe going on a little bit. I like to go from the left side of one battery to the right side of the next one, and then left out to the right side of the last battery or into that master. And then, so since we're on communication, let's talk about that inverter paralleling, right? So that one does matter. That one needs to be left to right, right to left, so on and so forth.
It's essentially outside to outside and inside to inside.
Right, to get that closed loop communication, so we're getting that continuous pathway, let's call it.
Yeah.
The one thing I've seen is if you've seen the green battery comms cables, right?
Yeah.
And it's got that kind of the
like
little
the
little foam fitting on there.
Yeah.
That's where I see most of the battery comms failures at. Is guys, they'll set them in there and they'll go to screw in that little nub right there for the watertight. And if you don't set the battery cable first, if you're just trying to do it there, a lot of times that data cable will kind of recess into that a little bit, and then that's where you get that lack of communication because it's not seated correctly all the way in that RS-45 or the battery comms port.
Yeah, see it all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, AJ, I don't think I have anything else I want to talk about today. You guys out there in TV land, if you guys have anything you guys would like to see us discuss in the future, issues that you see, please just subscribe to the channel, send us a message. We check the forums pretty regularly on all of our social media platforms, as well as our tech support team. If you guys see something out there that you guys want to see us talk about or address, AJ and myself are happy to jump back in here. We love doing this, love talking to you guys. But that's what I got. AJ, thank you so much for joining us. And this has been Grid Gone Wild, and we'll see you guys next time.